Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Um, Today is a great topic. I've got with me Doaa Abou Hussein from Kindred Purpose. Um, she is the principal consultant of Kindred Purpose, a women-led social enterprise specializing in research and evaluation for purpose-driven organizations. Today, we're going to be talking about reports, big reports that either live somewhere where after you create them, nobody knows what to do with them after people read them. So today we're going to be talking about how to create reports that people will use, that are actionable, that are functional, that are institutionalized and operationalized. Doaa, a little bit about yourself. Let's tell us a little bit more about Kindred Purpose and how you got into this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart because I spend a good amount of my life writing reports and different products to present a lot of research. So I've actually I've been on both sides of reports. I've been on the side that commissions reports, and I've been on the side that writes reports. Mm-hmm. And I've just seen way too many reports go to waste. You see so much research is done, but then it just sits there and it's forgotten and it collects dust, and maybe somebody skimmed it once, and then it's not used again. And so before starting Kindred Purpose Consultants, I spent 11 years in the federal government. And so over there, I was writing reports. I was, reading reports from different stakeholders, all that kind of stuff. But it just hit me a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is like way too dense and way too long and unusable, and like there's another layer of analysis that I have to do to kind of like figure out what it's saying, and I'm like, this is not helping me. Like, if the research isn't helping me, like it's not helping the decision makers, it's not helping those around me. So that's why when we started Kindred Purpose Consultants, we were very adamant that the research that we do, we are a very research focused firm, it has to be useful. It's not research that is just done, for the sake of research. We're not in academia here. We're doing research that moves the needle. We're doing research that helps change the actual reality for communities. And that's what I love about this kind of thing of, we're seeing the needle move. We're seeing actual action. We're seeing actual impact. And that's my why, really. I love to serve communities, and I serve communities through research.
Absolutely. I mean, at Third Wonder here, we work with a lot of nonprofits in the philanthropic sector, and we come across a lot of the reports. And we always find that they're developed and created for a very specific audience. And it's the audience that is the primary reader of the report. But after that, considering that a report will usually have multiple stakeholders from different lenses looking at the data and looking at the information and how is it that you go about synthesizing these reports so that it's easier for different people to look at the same information and the same data, but make it useful for them?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, you have to think about who your audience is from before you start your research. You really need to think about, is this for decision makers? If it's for decision makers, we need to be asking a lot of the questions of like, which actions would potentially be taken? What's going on? What's the real issue here? How can we unpack the issue? How can we communicate why this issue matters? What are the issues that, decision makers aren't aware of? And how do we bring those to the forefront? And then, and not just bring them to the forefront. We don't just want to list findings. We want to give decision makers actual next steps, actual recommendations that are practical and tailored to them. And so it's kind of like, you always need to think about, like, if you're doing research for decision makers, it's helping them understand the issue in a very concise way, but in a very impactful way. And then giving them the next step, because they don't have that time to go and read like a 50-page report to find the next step. The next step has to be like right there, hand in hand, like a little bit of context as to like why you're giving the recommendation, and then right next to it, that recommendation, that next step, that actionable insight. So stuff like that really matters. when we're talking about like a different audience, like a community, how are they going to interact with that research? Do they want to see their stories reflected? Is it, do they want to see stats, or do they want to see stories, or do they want to see a mix of both? And how are we reflecting that back to them? And what's the best format? And maybe in a situation like that, instead of like, they don't really care about the recommendations as much as like they do care about the recommendations, but it has less weight to them as much as seeing themselves reflected back in what you've produced. So stuff like case studies or a series like that's presented kind of like the different stories and how this actually leads to an insight that's driving change and driving the recommendations. You can present it in so many different ways that kind of clicks for communities. If we're talking about, the frontline workers, maybe their recommendations have to be different than the recommendations that go to decision makers. And what they want to know and the depth of knowledge that they might want is going to be very different. And it also depends on the type of frontline worker that you're presenting this information to. And for Kindred Purpose consultants, we work with a lot of organizations that work directly with newcomers. And a lot of these organizations that serve newcomers are settlement organizations, and they themselves often employ a lot of newcomers. So when we're talking about presenting something for newcomers or for frontline workers serving newcomers, we need to adjust the whole language and we need to adjust the whole setup so that it's actually usable for the frontline workers. The plain language level, like we're not talking about like, university level language. We're talking, maybe we need to take this down to a grade 3 to 5 level. So it's actually accessible and usable. So it's like taking all of this like dense research, but you're packaging it in a way that actually will be like legible and usable and insightful for that right audience. And even like for frontline workers, we also have to think about what's their role. And they're all diverse. So it's like, can we segment this? If it's a frontline worker, let's say in a settlements organization versus like a gender-based violence organization versus healthcare, can we create like different pieces that directly resonate for them and showcase why it matters for them? And maybe instead of a 50-page report, you've got like 3 2-pagers that are maybe presented visually as an infographic or something and really conveys the information very effectively. So all these different stakeholders, you really have to think about how they'll use it and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue with creating really large reports is that it's not always accessible, and the accessibility part of it is the most important part, which is how do different types of people or different groupings of people consume content or understand it. Some people like to read long reports, some people like to skim, some people are more visual, some people like short form summaries of things. Some people like case studies and stories. So repackaging all of that, but also keeping the core of the report and the data and the synthesized research is pretty important. Now, when you go about that, how do you work with the organization to really understand all of these different audiences and who you're writing for?
That's a great question. So before we ever start the research, we always sit down with the organization and we ask, who's going to be reading this? Because that reader, that's everything. That defines how you shape your research. It defines your research methodology. It defines how you write the product. It defines the different formats. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Traditional reports may not be the way to go. You may not actually end up needing them. They may not be the right format. They may not be the right audience. It might be unnecessary, like that depth of, writing, like going, 50 to 100 pages. If it sits on a shelf, does that even like do justice to the work that's been done or the research or the fact that you've gone into communities and asked questions? Like if it's forgotten, it means nothing. It doesn't matter how rigorous. So we always have a conversation about who the ultimate reader or user will be. And then we ask why this matters to them, or why they've even commissioned this. Because usually there's like another layer to kind of like their why behind this. Is it because they don't understand a certain issue and they're trying to unpack it a little bit more and figure out, how it's going to shape their programs? Is it because they're trying to get actual insights that change how their staff work with different like vulnerable communities. Like, what are they actually trying to get at here? Because that is what's going to inform how we do the research and then the product from it. So let's say they want insights that drive how their staff work with vulnerable populations, then that doesn't necessarily have to be a report. That can be a tool or a series of tools or a series of guides or whatever it is. You can always like add a little bit of context in the beginning of tools to kind of convey like the issue itself and the context. And that's always really important to kind of situate why certain actions are recommended or how you should approach a certain situation. But that product is not a report. Yeah. That product is a tool or a guide or something useful to that audience. If we're talking about unpacking an issue, you know, who wants to understand that issue and why do they want to understand that issue? Like if it's at the decision-making level, is it because they're trying to get into a new community that they haven't served before and they really want to understand the barriers to kind of entering this community? Then you need maybe a little bit more insights, and maybe a report is a good format, but because they want that full story, they want all of that nuance, but you always need to, you know, add a little bit of like a summary on top of it, like an executive summary or like a web page or something that's a cover, like even a briefing note. Like think about a briefing note even for decision makers of like, here are your key takeaways, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here are your key recommended next steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. It could even be a table.
Yeah.
That on its own could take a really substantial report and all of a sudden make it very readable. And here's another trick. You can always link, you know, between that table, let's say that you've just summarized, between that and the part of the report itself that unpacks that issue a little bit more. And I love that because like that aspect, it's like if they're really interested in unpacking that, they'll go to it. They don't have to look for it. They don't have to go through a table of contents. They don't have to do all of that. They can just get to that piece. And so that also makes reports even more accessible and more usable for the audience that you want to work with.
Yeah. I mean, everything's pretty much digital these days. So a lot of the reports that do get created either in PDF format or in web format or get digested in different ways. But each of these formats always has its own perspective and its own, own nuance and structure, which is the fun part. How do you make this content? Well, one, searchable online if it is going to be something that is going to be accessible to everybody, and two, in the way that everybody would consume it in a format that's easy to understand. In saying that, good research, what does that look like for you? Going back a little to the beginning, when you're creating the research, when you're going through the research, how do you think about the end product from the beginning, and what are the types of questions do you lead in with when you're talking to organizations?
Yes, so you always have to think about the end product from before you start, because that is completely contingent on the audience. So let's say our audience is the decision makers that are trying to kind of understand an issue. Then we need to really unpack that issue. We like our research, the questions that we're asking in the research have to get at the why and who else has done this and what has worked for other people and what hasn't worked and what are the barriers, what are the challenges, what are the risks, like really understanding those. So if the audience is decision makers, then the questions you ask have to really unpack that issue. Let's say your audience is communities and they want to kind of understand why a solution maybe isn't working. Then you need to kind of start to ask different questions of like, okay, the solution, what is the solution that was like presented? Let's say it was some kind of intervention. And you need to talk to communities and you want to make sure that they're going to be reflected back. So you're asking questions to understand each individual person or each individual organization's story. Your questions are different than like, understanding just an issue or understanding like why this has been a specific issue or a specific challenge or completely inaccessible, let's say, for a certain group of people. And so your product for that isn't necessarily a dense report or just a dense report or any of that. Maybe it's like a report and case studies that you can pull up, or it's a series of case studies, or it's a series of stories that you're posting. And, when you're talking about that digital piece, that's where, posting that series and kind of creating that, maybe it's a series of blogs and you're posting that, or articles or whatever. There's so many different formats to share these insights back with communities. And you have to really think as well, how am I taking the questions that I've asked before and then packaging up the information that I have so that people will also want to engage with this? And it's not embellishment. It's doing justice to the questions that you've asked, and it's honoring the stories that you've just heard. Because if you're not conveying those stories very clearly and very accessibly and in a way that people will want to engage with them, those stories are not actually going to drive change. Communities are not actually going to see themselves reflected in what you've created. So always having that clear linkage is very important. And I always say that there's a very significant ethical responsibility when you're doing research and going into communities, especially, to kind of go and, accurately convey people's stories. And sometimes you're going to have to aggregate stories here and there, but you want to make sure people will see this and be able to say, yes, I can see how my story is reflected here. I know that this is conveyed the challenge that I'm experiencing. And one example that I can give you firsthand is I had done this, I'd gone into an organization that had very significant issues, like 10 to 14 years worth of issues, actually. And I went and I interviewed like 84 people, and I did a survey and all that kind of stuff. And the report for that was a dense report, but it had an executive summary that kind of summarized the key insights and the recommendations for decision makers. But 300 people read that report across the organization. And that was really huge for me because they all saw themselves reflected in it. And one by one, I had people kind of coming to me and saying, thank you for sharing my story. So when we're talking about research with purpose, research has to convey stories accurately, clearly, accessibly. If it's not, you've missed the point.
So this comes to the question of, how do you work with the pushback of people that want to have these very academic and rigorous reports, that because it's been part of the institution and there's an institutionalized view on reports and how they should be structured and the way they should read and all of that? Because I see a lot of that where there's these reports that need to be in this very specific format, but that also alienates a lot of people. But because of the ask and the legacy of the ask as well.
It's funny because in my experience, actually, I'm seeing a lot more organizations move away from that style, even within government, because they're starting to see these 100-page evaluation reports are never being used again. And what people are actually using as part of that is that little summary that has the recommendations. So I'm seeing that I've been seeing that shift for the past decade even. But for those that still want those very traditional academic types of reports, sure, but there's a way that you can add in the usability aspect. Instead of just structuring it as a dense paragraph after paragraph and starting it with your introduction, then your methodology, then all of that, which, by the way, if I am writing a traditional type of report, no matter what, I'm adding in that methodology because I think people deserve to know how this report was created and the research, how it was done. But I'm always trying to use a bit of plain language, because your audience, no matter who it might be, may not be as familiar with the subject matter as the researcher or the people who commissioned this research. So you always want to make sure, if this was handed off to somebody who's completely brand new to the topic, do they get an explanation of what these terms are? Is there some kind of glossary? Is there some kind of introduction to what these terms are somewhere in the actual text of the report? Is there something that is putting the insights up front? Can you create a summary section at the beginning? The academic forms of papers often have an abstract or a summary in the beginning. Can we shape that into a way that's really engaging? Or can we add complementary pieces to the final product? So sure, we've created this more technical or academic type of report, Can we tack on like an infographic summary? Can we tack on an executive summary? Can we tack on like something that summarizes the recommendations, like the key insights and the recommendations? Because that takes it from a report you're going to have to, sit down for a whole afternoon or maybe spend your weekend reading it as like light reading. And then it becomes something that, you can quickly see those insights. So you're not having to engage that completely, especially if you expect it to go to diverse audiences. Yeah. So a lot of it is just me having these conversations with organizations and kind of asking them how they expect these to be used and who it's going to. Is it just going to a funder, or is it also going to be seen by communities? Is it also going to be seen by their own decision makers? Yeah. And how can we tailor the final products to each of these final users?
When it comes to repurposing the content within a report, do you see things like social media? You mentioned articles on blog posts and variations of the case studies there, but do you see social media playing an impact on that? And any other forms of digital marketing actually audiences resonate with different repurposed pieces of content from the report in a different format than the report itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've done that myself actually for a few different organizations. So it's interesting because social media is also fairly diverse. So what you post on LinkedIn, what's going to resonate might be a slightly different content than what you post on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And that kind of engagement, like it has to be a little bit different. So you have to tailor what you're producing, but it can actually increase the accessibility and engagement with the research itself and with your findings. And there's certain things that will resonate more. So for example, case studies or narratives or profiling, like, a member of the community or something like that, that is huge actually, because you're able to kind of show the visuals of it or showing why a community is struggling. You're not just showcasing the information or the insights, but you're also reinforcing to your audience on social media why your organization is doing the work that it is doing. And that's a very big deal, because it increases your legitimacy. It gives them a rationale for kind of the direction that you're going in, and it helps them engage with your mission. And that's a really big deal, because if we talk about organizations, especially in the nonprofit space, funding is a really big thing. And proof of impact is a really big thing. Yes. The more you're able to demonstrate that on an ongoing basis, and it's backed by solid research, but presented accessibly, oh my God, your legitimacy and like people's desire to support your mission is going to go through the roof. And that's what I love to see, because I want really good causes to have all the funding and all the backing and all the community support that they can get. So yes, by all means, take those insights, repackage them a million times over, and let the world see this.
Absolutely. I think making sure that people in all different spaces get to see the research and the missions is really key. And one of those things that is always often overlooked is social media, email marketing, writing content beyond the report itself. And as you mentioned, tools, infographics, all of that. I mean, the richness of the information there, it's a shame to have it just siloed in a PDF that gets passed around in email and then gets lost in your shared drive somewhere.
Exactly. I just want to add one quick thing too. You mentioned before, like digital engagement and SEO. Mm-hmm. And the more you post, like the more it's actually going to up your SEO and the visibility that you get. So if you take that same content, repackage it into, let's say, a blog post for your website, that ups your SEO. You're posting, there's engagement, share it with your newsletter audience, whatever. Like that's really going to grow your audience. Tack on like all the LinkedIn stuff. LinkedIn is indexed to Google now. And I believe Instagram is too. Everything that you're posting there, like it does also increase your visibility. So why just create research that sits on a shelf versus it can completely raise awareness for the issue that you're addressing and help, broaden the community that's backing this issue with you.
Yes, that is a very underlooked thing, especially now with search being upended, or not upended, but augmented and enhanced with AI, and people asking more and more questions and broader questions about specific topics. Having the richness of the data being in different formats enriches whatever it is, and a large language model like ChatGPT or Gemini. People are asking very nuanced questions. Having that content out there in different formats allows an AI to be able to give back that nuanced answer, and also bring up the research and bring up the who commissioned the research and the report in itself. This has been a very interesting conversation. I am fully behind you on this, of being able to repurpose and restructure content for a digital audience. And it's one of those things that I find more and more important as people are consuming content in different ways, wanting more information and visibility over the researchers that change their lives and change the way their lived experience is, and who want to know that people out there in the social good sphere and in the nonprofit space that are looking out for them, that there's something that's happening. It's very empowering to know that that's out there, and to also have a bit of agency to understand that how these things are happening.
Yeah. And I also want to add that good research, rigorous research, does not have to be a technical product or published in an academic journal for it to be good research. The point of good research is to move the needle.
Yes.
If you're really doing that to serve communities, it has to move the needle. So making sure it's usable in a way that's actually going to move the needle, that's what matters more than anything. Like, in addition to your rigor, how you present it.
Absolutely. We are at about time. I want to thank you again, Doaa, for joining us today and giving us your insights and your thoughts on how to create research that people will use. It is more important than ever, especially these days, for people to know how their lives are changing and who are the good people behind the work that changes their lives. And if you want to connect with Doaa, I'm throwing in her LinkedIn right there. If you want to follow her or connect to her or reach out to her. And Kindred Purpose. If you at the end of this session, we're going to send out an email with a checklist. You want to tell us a little bit about the checklist, Doaa?
Yes. So the checklist walks you through what to consider before you start doing the research, and then what to consider after you finish the research and you're preparing the product. And you'll see that even before you start the research, thinking about your audience, the final use of this, who's going to be, making decisions based off of it, or who's using this in different ways, that drives that final product as well. And it also gives you options of different ways you could present that research. It doesn't have to be a traditional report. And in fact, I would encourage you to think about non-traditional formats to present different information, maybe instead of a traditional report or complementary to it. So it helps present the information in more accessible ways. So I hope it's useful to everybody, and it's definitely a good guide for before and after the research is done.
Absolutely. Everybody will be getting this PDF with the checklist in the recap email. Thank you, Doaa, for your insights, and would love to see you again sometime soon. For everybody, thanks for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, everyone.